again, thank you so much, Namisha, and make sure your name is updated and includes your school so we can send you to the right breakout rooms. Oh, yes. So we have 3 items on our agenda today, and I'm just going to read the folks to my right to read them off for us this morning. So feel free to hop off mute just to mix up the voices in the room. Can I get Kara to read our first objective for the day?
Today, we will engage in a consultancy protocol to diagnose root causes and brainstorm strategies.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's get Kristen Hughes to read our next one.
I just lost it. I changed my view. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, I'm coming back. Okay, we are going to review examples of strategies to increase students' access to grade level assignments.
Awesome. And finally, let's have Lucas read our next one. I don't know if Lucas heard me. Lucas, if you can hear me, if you can read our last objective. All right, let's pop down to Matt Bayard.
So we'll revisit improvement goals to plan for progress monitoring and change management. So Lucas, you're welcome.
If he ends up in your breakout room, you can let him know. Awesome. So we are going to review we're going to look at some examples of next steps to increase access to grade level assignments. And you'll have time to revisit your school improvement plans and goals to incorporate next steps from the audit. All right, so knowing that the majority of today's session is going to be engaging in a consultancy protocol with colleagues, there are a couple of the community agreements that we wanted to make sure we highlight for today that feel especially relevant. And those 2 are Speak Your Truth and Possess a Growth Mindset. So we're thinking about Speak Your Truth, really engaging in this protocol today, especially if you are going to be the consultant and giving feedback and asking questions. We really encourage you to be forthcoming in your thoughts and your feedback. It really won't do leaders, teachers, or students any good if we withhold critical feedback from each other just to be polite. Essentially, the purpose of this space is to get fresh ideas, and sometimes that means being a little pushed, and that's okay. Like, we're all colleagues, and we want to make sure that we are putting plans in place that feel actionable and strategic, and sometimes that requires us to be direct. So clear is kind. Unclear is unkind in today's space. But of course, with that, we're making sure that we do frame our questions and our input productively, and we own our impact in the space. Secondly, really want to elevate possess a growth mindset as well. So especially if you are a presenter today, it may be a little bit difficult, who knows, to hear colleagues who work in different contexts weigh in about your challenge or weigh in about your problem of practice. And suggest things that maybe you've already tried at this point. Ultimately, we're thinking about maintaining a growth mindset because, hopefully that will allow us to be open to perspectives and possibilities and try new solutions. So really want to elevate those 2 community agreements for our space today. As a reminder, we met in January and spent most of our time auditing the assignments that you collected. We heard some amazing reflections from that time. Thank you again so much for your engagement that day. We also talked about the value of looking at student work and providing evidence, not only of student performance, but also teacher practice. Ultimately, we named that assignment rigor is a key factor, and sometimes we can be a little stressed by the fact that as rigor increases, student performance may dip, but that dip is only temporary as teachers gain access to the right support. So that really cues us up for what's happening next month, where we focus on strong instruction and think about what does that support really look like? How do we coach and support teachers to being able to deliver that strong instruction to support that rebound in student performance on high quality instructional materials? We'll talk about what that looks like specifically in ELA and math classrooms and how coaching around these look-fors can help teachers close a student performance gap on grade level work. And I'm going to kick things off to Namisha, who's going to dig into our very exciting consultancy protocol.
Thank you, Nadia. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here with us. We're just going to dive right into this consultancy protocol. We're going to spend a little bit of time setting up for the protocol together as a whole group, and then we'll have close to an hour in small groups, like actually engaging in the full consultancy protocol. So as Nadia mentioned at the beginning of this session, we're going to be using a protocol provided by the School Reform Initiative that probably any of you who have done consultancy protocols before, you've probably seen this. So it should hopefully feel a little bit familiar to you. This protocol begins with guidance on framing a consultancy dilemma and identifying a focus question, which is basically what is the challenge that you want to tackle with your consultancy group. I just want to name that while the School Reform Initiative protocol uses the language of dilemma for the rest of the session, we're going to be referring to it as a problem of practice for our collective work. So this protocol defines a problem of practice as a puzzle or an issue that raises questions, an idea that seems to have conceptual gaps, or something about like process or product that you just can't figure out. We want to take some time to identify what is the problem of practice that I want my colleagues' input on to help me kind of troubleshoot and problem solve. So the first thing when you're trying to identify your problem of practice, you want to first think about significant trends that were illuminated by your assignment audit that you completed over the last month. So think about what did the audit reveal to you that is not already on its way to being resolved. So you don't want to pick something that you already have a solution for and you're like already acting on. So here's a quick example. Let's say I did an audit of my 6th grade math classroom. I collected a bunch of 6th grade math assignments. And a trend that I noticed in these assignments is that Mr. Spider-Man is modifying assignments from Eureka Math in a way that makes the assignments less rigorous and over-scaffolded. So the assignment audit has revealed to me that my 6th grade math teacher, even though we've adopted these high quality instructional materials, my 6th grade math teacher is over scaffolding them and students still aren't being challenged appropriately. That was sort of like, let's say that was my aha moment from the assignment audit. The next thing you want to do is reflect on the trend or the problem of practice that you want to interrogate further. So you want to ask yourself things like, why is this a problem of practice for my school? Why is it important to me? What have I already done to try to remedy or address this problem of practice? And what have been the results of those attempts? And then what assumptions might I have? What might I assume to be true about this problem of practice? And how might those assumptions or bias influence how I'm thinking about this problem? So to continue with my example of Mr. Spider-Man, let's say I know as a school leader that Mr. Spider-Man is only a 2nd year teacher. So I assume that he has the best intentions and he's just trying to help his students. And perhaps he doesn't realize that in doing so, he's lowering the bar by over scaffolding these assignments. And for things that perhaps I've tried in the past, I know that at my school, we've done a series of content-specific professional learning. When we adopted Eureka, we went through, a full professional learning series on how to implement the curriculum, but that hasn't resulted in anything. Let's say I still recognize that our math assessment data has remained pretty stagnant. So this is just an example of the types of reflections you might engage in as you're interrogating and kind of narrowing down your problem of practice. And then the last step, once you've kind of thought a little more deeply about your problem of practice, is to frame it as a focus question that you will share with your consultancy group. So this question should be something that's both important to your practice, but also important to student learning. So it can focus on the specific teacher or teachers whose assignments you evaluated. So if you just collected assignments from one teacher's classroom, your focus question might narrow in just on supporting that one teacher. Or you might decide that you want to expand trends from the audit to consider a question that's perhaps applicable to your larger staff. It doesn't have to just focus on classroom. So going back to the 6th grade math example, if I'm that school leader, I've only audited 6th grade math assignments from Mr. Spider-Man's classroom, but I perhaps know at my school that this is kind of a common problem. I'm seeing the same trends maybe in 7th and 8th grade math and even in ELA. So I know that we've invested in HQIM, we've done tons of PL on it, but students are still doing below grade level work and the data is just not moving. So I would frame that, for example, as a question like, what else can I do to help teachers implement our adopted curriculum with fidelity? So that's an example of a focus question for my problem of practice that I would then present to my consultancy group to help me figure out and find some solutions for. I'll pause here for just a second. We're going to give you a few minutes to come up with your own problem of practice and focus question. But before we do that, are there any questions about setting up, determining your problem of practice? Okay. As a side note, also in the note catcher, all of this stuff is in your note catcher as well, in case if you're having a hard time like reading it on the slides. As we get into, we're going to give you 5 minutes to reflect on the results of your audit and draft a focus question in our cohort workbook. During these 5 minutes, all those guiding questions that I just went over are both in your note catcher and included in the CSI cohort workbook. So you have them all there to kind of help you push your thinking. So we'll take 5 minutes. Please make sure you're capturing your notes on tab 5 of the CSI cohort workbook. So since we have lots of tabs now, I just want to make sure I emphasize that once you open the workbook, you should be going over to tab 5 consultancy, and we're just focusing on this first column, identifying your problem of practice. All right, I'm going to start our timer for 5 minutes. If you have any questions during these 5 minutes, feel free to come off mute or just pop those questions in the chat. Got just under 2 minutes remaining. That is time, but I want to make sure everybody is able to identify a problem of practice before we get into the consultancy. So can you just share in the chat? I can't see everybody's video. So if you could just share in the chat, like how many extra minutes you think you might need, we can add that on. No minutes, 0, we're all good to go. Okay, if that's the case, we will go ahead and move forward. Okay. All right, before we dive into the consultancy, we're going to do a little bit of setting up together as a whole group. So for this consultancy, we're going to send you all into sort of randomized groups of 5 to 6 people. In that group, there's a few different roles. One person will be the presenter. The presenter is the person whose work or problem of practice is going to be discussed by the rest of the group. And then you'll have another person serve as the facilitator. The facilitator is someone who will be responsible for monitoring time, guiding the discussion, and taking notes during the discussion. This person can also serve as a consultant, like they can engage in the conversations, but they just have these sort of added responsibilities. And then the remaining group members will serve just as consultants. So the consultants are discussing and offering strategies to address the presenter's problem of practice. So once you are in your consultancy groups in just a moment, there's 2 things you're going to need to do first before you start the consultancy process. One is have everybody in the group just whip around and quickly share your problem of practice, and then determine as a group which focus question you want to interrogate further. This person is now the presenter. So you can do this like one of 2 ways. You can either select a focus question that feels particularly unique and like deep and challenging, or if multiple people in the group share very similar focus questions, the group might decide like, hey, we have some common challenges here. Let's address that because it's going to affect all of us. So it's up to the group. And then once you've identified a presenter, go ahead and assign someone a facilitator who will guide discussion and monitor time. So 2 things first: identify a problem of practice and assign a facilitator. So before I quickly go over kind of the flow of the protocol, we do want to name that obviously we have limited time today with your consultancy group, so you're only going to be able to dive into one person's problem of practice. So if you don't get to present today, we do strongly encourage you to work through a similar protocol with the rest of your leadership team at your school so that you have the space and the opportunity to respond to the trends that the assignment audit revealed for you. And then finally, even if you're not presenting, our hope is that you are able to walk away from this experience with ideas and suggestions that you can adapt for your context, just kind of hearing and engaging in that conversation with your peers. All right, so once a presenter and facilitator have been determined, then you can just immediately start the consultancy process. And facilitators, remember that you will be monitoring time. We will message out time checks, but this is going to be pretty tight on time. So facilitators will be super important here. Total, this will last about 45 minutes. I'm going to give a quick overview of the process, but this whole process is also included in your note catcher and the workbook. So you don't have to memorize it. So first, the presenter is going to frame their problem of practice for the group. And this is where, if you're the presenter, you can share any additional context or artifacts if you have those available. For example, if you happen to have digital versions of the assignments that you audited and you want to share them with the group, this would be a great place to do that. This should take no more than 10 minutes. For the next 5 minutes, the group asks clarifying questions. So these are questions that just have brief factual answers. So we're not trying to solve the problem yet, we're just trying to understand the problem. For example, you might ask, how many teachers teach this course? What curriculum have you adopted? What training have teachers gotten around the curriculum? Things like that. Then the group has up to an additional 10 minutes to ask probing questions. These now are questions that are going to help the presenter clarify and expand their thinking about their problem of practice. The goal here is that the presenter starts to learn more about their problem and start to do some analysis through the questions that are being asked of them. So this isn't time for discussion quite yet. It's time for deeper interrogation of that problem. And then finally, the group discusses the problem of practice for up to 15 minutes. During this time, the group is kind of digging into the problem, offering solutions and strategies, and the presenter is listening. And presenter, you can also take your own notes as well on what you're hearing. And the last 5 minutes are reserved for the presenter to kind of reflect on everything they've heard and how they're now thinking about how they might want to respond to their problem of practice. So presenter frames the problem, clarifying questions, probing questions, discussion, and reflection. Those are the 5 key steps. Are there any questions about this process? Okay, in just a moment, Senya is going to send us all off to our random groups. Once you're in your groups, we ask that for the sake of time, you just go ahead and jump right in to the process, identify a presenter and a facilitator, and then just go ahead and engage in the full consultancy protocol. And just a reminder, facilitators, do please capture notes in tab 5 of the workbook, and we will be popping around to support and answer any questions.
Okay, everyone, welcome back from your break. And we hope you really enjoyed the consultancy protocol and got some really awesome strategies and ideas from that conversation. And if not, hopefully you generated a really awesome conversation that can shift your thinking and impact how you really want to consider moving forward. But before we reflect on school improvement plans specifically, let's talk for a few minutes about potential next steps that might increase students' access to grade level assignments and be thoughtful about managing this change with teachers and staff. Actually, we noticed that quite a few of the problems of practice, especially in the CSI workbook, did focus on increasing access to grade level work in classrooms, or they focused on the fact that some of these questions being posed are not reaching the depth and rigor of the standards or of the curriculum that you have in mind. So hopefully these next few slides will help brainstorm a few solutions on that area. So what you see on this slide is a flow chart of scenarios to help you towards the types of strategies you might employ based on the results of your audit. Really quickly, these screenshots are actually in your handout. So if you want to be able to look really closely at the text, definitely look at your note catcher so that you can follow along. But I'm just going to voice over some of our options. So first, if you have already adopted high quality instructional materials for the course that you dug into, and your teachers do implement that curriculum exactly as written, but they may not truly understand what makes it high quality or what makes it grade appropriate, you might want to focus your next steps on professional learning specifically and target some of those gaps, whether it's the skills, the execution, or even the content knowledge, doing communities of practice around increasing their understanding of the content that they're executing in their classes. But if you have not identified or adopted high quality instructional materials, consider whether you do have a system in place to review teacher created assignments. If you do have a system to review teacher assignments, consider whether that structure might need to be improved because we're still not seeing the depth and rigor that you want to be seeing in classes. If you do not have a system currently in place, then maybe your action steps are around establishing such a system to review lessons or to review teacher assignments before they're in front of kids. Now, sometimes though, the problems of practice are not tactical and they're more tied to mindset needs. We recommend proactively thinking about mindset challenges. If your teachers are theoretically bought into the idea of grade level work, but don't really know what it looks like, then you might plan professional learning that includes skill development, practice, and feedback. For example, perhaps teachers actually take a grade level assessment and reflect on the knowledge and skills that were required. They do that assignment in advance and they dig into what makes it rigorous and what learning do students need in order to engage in this assessment at the level that the assessment demands. However, if your teachers prefer to meet students where they are rather than prioritize some of that grade level rigor, or they think, you know what, students aren't just ready for this right now, maybe your next steps may include some more one-on-one coaching. Those kinds of things tend to be addressed better in conversations where there's a lot of confidence between them and the coach. There's already a relationship formed because those conversations might require a little bit more pushing, a little bit more self-investigation to help teachers better understand that the student experience when they lower the bar doesn't actually engage them and push them where they need to be. Finally, if you don't think you'll face much pushback, maybe we recommend going back to the resources and skills. Do teachers adapt or create their own assignments? And if so, what guardrails and checks are in place to ensure that quality? So with all of that, just take a quick moment to consider your audit and the teachers from whom you collected assignments. You also have these flowcharts again, like I said, in your note catcher, so you can read them a bit easier. They're way bigger than they might be on your slide. So where would you situate yourself and your school staff in the moment? Are you thinking more that you might need some adaptive mindset change? Do you think you need just more tactical things because folks are pretty bought into the curriculum and they just don't understand the grade level depth? Take about 2 minutes to reflect on where you are currently in your school and what course of action might make the most sense. And again, feel free to look at the note catcher to be able to see this flow chart in a bigger format. Okay, so we're actually gonna take a few more minutes in breakout rooms before we jump into independent work time. And in your breakout, share where you'd like to place your school on specific staff or for specific staff and what strategies you're thinking about implementing in terms of next steps. We'll spend about 5 minutes in breakout rooms. And of course, note any ideas that you hear and really resonate with you. And maybe you can incorporate into your planning in the last part of this session where we're going to dig into some of that strategy setting and planning as it relates to your school improvement goals. And we'll go ahead and we can probably copy and paste this question into the chat.
This meeting is being recorded.
Well, thank you all so much for engaging in that dialogue in your breakout rooms. Is there anybody who wants to share really quickly? We have like another like minute or two before we like need to transition to our next breakout time. I mean, to our next work time. But is there anyone who wants to come off mute and share a conversation from their breakout space? Not to put folks on blast, but the conversation in my breakout room was really awesome. Hint, hint, Mary, but you know.
I can share what we talked about. We were just discussing, I was sharing how it was kind of difficult for me to find a specific spot to place my teachers, that we have in our district really high quality curriculum that's aligned to the state standards. And we do a lot of work to make sure that we have a strong PACE guide and some common assessments as well. But we're working with the mind shift that's, you know, changing the adult perspective around especially new reading curriculum, and that students can be introduced and engage with on grade level curriculum when we're coming from a guided reading background. And although this is coming from a place of, I just want my kids to succeed, and this is what I'm used to and what I feel is best for kids, it's a mind shift and having those hard conversations. And I know you had shared with us, but creating that space of discussing those fears, and also just discussing that we're not going to necessarily see the change or embrace the change right away. It may take a couple of years before we see the benefits and get on board as adults as well.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Hopefully in your small group discussions just now, and then also just through the consultancy protocol process, you were able to start to get some either specific suggestions for next steps you might take, or things that are kind of making you, ideas that are making you think about what direction you might want to move in to address your own problem of practice. So what we're going to do for the next chunk of time to kind of, before we close out together, is take all of this feedback and input and findings from the audit and revisit your school improvement plan. So what we're asking you all to do for the next 25 minutes is to revisit those school improvement plan goals, like what goals do you have for your school this year, and reflect on what are your next steps based on what the assignment audit revealed to you and what you heard in your consultancy group. And we've included some guiding questions to help kind of drive your planning. First, which of your school improvement goals does this work around grade level assignments best align with? What have the audit results revealed to you about progress toward that goal? Are you making progress? Are you stalled? Is there a problem uncovered that you didn't realize? And then what are your immediate next steps coming out of this process? What mindset challenges might you encounter as you start to implement those next steps, and how are you going to handle some of those mindset challenges? We're asking everybody to take this time to reflect on these questions and capture your notes on the next steps. Sorry, capture your notes and next steps on tab 6 of the CSI cohort workbook. And after 25 minutes, we will come back together, whole group, to close out together. So don't hop off the call, but do feel free to turn your video off while you work. Are there any questions about what we are doing? Okay, I'm going to start the timer for 25 minutes. Oh, we are sending you to breakouts. I forgot to mention, we're sending you to breakouts, but it's totally optional to like collaborate. It's just a space for you to pop in and ask questions of your peers if you have them, but you are also welcome to use this time to just work completely independently.
Joseph? Hey, Joseph, can you hear me?
Hello, hi. I got kicked off. Our internet went down for a little bit there. I am back now, though. Where are we
Right.
at? What are we doing?
Were you already in breakout rooms before, or you just came in?
I was in a breakout room when I lost connection, but not this one.
Oh, right, gotcha.
I was down for about 15 minutes, I think.
All right,
And yeah,
sounds good.
I can quickly explain what we're doing.
Thank you.
Sounds good, thank you.
It's mostly like independent work time. We put people in breakouts in case that you want to collaborate. So we can pop you in a room if you would like to bounce ideas around with someone. But basically what we're spending the next 12 minutes doing is taking everything you heard in the consultancy group and kind of in the breakouts and what the audit revealed to you and figuring out your next steps. So on tab 6 of the CSI cohort workbook is where everyone, once you go in there, you'll see everyone is popping in some notes there. We're reflecting on these guiding questions. What did the audit reveal? What are your next steps? What challenges do you think you'll face and how will you handle those?
Okay. Yeah, if I can be put in a breakout, that would be great. I don't need to be, though. I can go on my own.
Yeah, Senya will send you to a breakout.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, before we actually get into our closeout, we're gonna give you the survey now, so you don't have to worry about taking it right at the very end or try to remember taking it later. So don't log off quite yet. We still have to close out, but we're gonna give everybody a few minutes just to go ahead and fill out our feedback session survey, and then we will close out together. And Senya is putting the link to that survey in the chat. Take about 30 more seconds to wrap up your thoughts on the survey. And then I would love to hear from one person, whenever you're ready, hop off mute. What has this process revealed to you, and what are you planning to do about it? Would love to just hear from one person. What has been revealed, and what are your next steps?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Leclerc. I'm the principal at Wakanda, and our conversations have been really helpful today, just thinking about how we help teachers understand how to fill some gaps in students' learning before they jump into that grade level content, but within that same lesson. So that just-in-time instruction that we've heard about before, we actually have a staff meeting coming up on Friday. So we're going to model some of that thinking through some different kind of engagement strategies that they could use almost like as an anticipatory set of their lesson. And then when we come back after President's Day on Tuesday, we actually have grade level meetings scheduled. And so we'll really dig in then to kind of that differentiated work with grade level teams where they bring their plans and their things for that upcoming week, and we can unpack some of the things that they're doing and thinking about what learning kids might need, and so we can plug those in. So almost kind of that just-in-time instruction for teachers too, and then continue to kind of coach on that and probe their thinking to make sure that it's not just those few lessons that we plan together, but how that will work as they go forward and understanding how to fill gaps for students so that they feel more successful and students do as well. So today has been really helpful just in helping us think through that process in our next steps.
Thanks so much for sharing. I love how you're like immediately jumping into things you can do this week and next week, no matter how small they are, or if you have like big long-term plans for any of this, like as long as we're identifying some next steps, that's kind of where we want this work to go. There's a couple things I just wanted to highlight from trends we saw in the workbook as you guys were jotting things down. A couple of reminders. I saw a few comments about next steps, including having teachers do an assignment audit similar to the one we did together. I just want to plug that like you have all of the resources from our December session where we went over like how to audit, how to use the tool, etc. So you have all those resources. Please do feel free to use them so you don't have to start from scratch for something like that. I also saw a couple of comments about having teachers analyze student work. We talked about that a little bit in our January session, so feel free to pull those slides from the January session materials. And I also saw a couple comments about focusing in on coaching and feedback. And I just want to plug that we're going to start talking about that at our next session in March. So if that is your next step, like we got you coming up in March, we'll be sharing some tools and strategies for that as well. And then the only other thing I just wanted to highlight was just a reminder to highlight your bright spots. Whatever your next steps are and whatever you kind of identified as potential challenges with your teachers, you might have a different teacher, a different staff member who's already doing that thing really well. Highlight those exemplars that you already have at your campus. And if you don't have them, consider reaching out to other folks on this call, in this cohort, whose schools might have a similar context. Perhaps they have a bright spot. I know for me as a teacher, it was always really compelling when I was able to see, yes, my coach is telling me to do this thing, but I'm not convinced it works until I see an example of it working. So if you have that bright spot at your school or somewhere nearby, pull on it. Like, let's really like highlight the things that are going well. That is all we have for you all today. Thank you so much for your engagement. Quick look at our pre-work for March. We're going to send over a couple of observation tools for you to just skim over. We'll look at them more deeply in our next session, but it will be helpful if you just have previewed them beforehand. But surely we'll be sending that out via email a couple weeks before our next session. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your week.